can't make it. He's busy planting, I believe. And who else are we missing?
Todd is traveling, and he told us a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
Right. And Andra's not here. Okay, well, let's go ahead. Any additions or changes to the agenda?
I guess I'd like to propose, given that Patrick is here now and probably doesn't care too much about 4A, that we go directly to the master plan and do that first and then circle back about Bergman.
Okay, that sounds great.
Tom, can I ask a quick question too? Is Evan still on the CAC, or we haven't seen him in a long time?
You want me to answer that, Tom?
Yeah.
I didn't hear Karen.
She was asking if Evan is still on the CAC, and technically, yes.
Yes. It would require a public hearing to change that. So.
Or the town board would need to. He has not resigned, but he has had quite a few personal issues.
Okay.
But we've been in touch with him on email. I think he had hoped that he could still continue. But we haven't seen him in a while.
Okay. Great. Thanks. Because I think he was also going to be the Lansing rep to the Environmental Management Council.
That's right. And he made one meeting, and I don't know if he's made another meeting. So we may need to take you up on your offer, Dave, to be the rep or fill in until we know a little bit more.
Okay, so shall we talk about the comments regarding the master plan?
Sure. I know Karen had comments from a meeting. I submitted some comments to the group. And then Tom, you and some planning board members had comments.
Yeah.
So,
But Karen, do you want to go ahead and talk about your Ludlowville meeting?
Yeah, sure.
Karen, you're very quiet for me. I don't know if other people can hear
Same thing for me. I can't hear Karen very well.
Hold on. Okay, if I don't use the headset, is that better?
You sound good. Yeah, you sound good.
Okay, that's crazy. Headset's supposed to be better, better quality. Anyway, so Pat has probably heard quite a bit of this because Joe sent a summary to CJ and Pat, but I can go over this for the behalf of the committee. So I had looked at the presentation after MJ had done their presentation, and immediately the recommendations for Ludlowville jumped out. And I talked to Joe about that it might be a good idea to just find out from the neighbors who were going to be impacted by any developments to the park, to find out whether they even knew about them. And in fact, as it turned out, they really didn't. And I guess just to say up front, this is a really interesting communication issue, which I can tell you they're really on board to making comments for the open space plan. If there's any positive outcome, it's that. They're really fired up about having their voices heard. But many of them did see the announcement that went around to attend this virtual meeting, but when they read that it was about parks, they assumed it was the Lansing Trail Salt Point, and Myers Point, and to none of them, and there were 35 or 40 people at this meeting, not a single person who saw that announcement made that connection that it might have also pertained to Ludlowville Park, because it's such a tiny pocket park and there's so much personal ownership. People really feel like it's more of their backyard than a town park in general. So that was one interesting finding. I think everybody knows how heavily the people in Ludlowville have also been impacted by the rerouting of the traffic because of the bridge. And many people are also feeling like, because there's been so much more traffic going through Ludlowville, they've been driven out of their neighborhood park because it's become so popular and word has traveled. So that really set a stage for some pretty strong feelings about the recommendations of the plan. Takeaway message is that plan should not be a one size fits all. We talked about the 4 components of as they were outlined in the plan: the sidewalk, the parking lot, the toilet facility, and the path going down to the creek. Everybody was completely understanding about the ADA requirements or suggestions to have people be able to get from the road to the overlook at the falls, and they're really fine with that and quite supportive of it. The parking lot, people understand that it's an issue, but making the park more accessible to more people from the county and even outside the county is only going to create more of a problem, including people having parking going on their lawns and in front of their houses. And so we had a pretty lengthy discussion about even seeing whether we could get parking limitations on the road, as well as keeping the parking lot on the small side. And they're discussing amongst themselves what they would like about restricted parking, perhaps hours or time period or something like that, because Ludlowville Road is not a town road. It's a county road, including down to the lower fishing area. I mean, the upper fishing area. The toilets are a serious issue. Nobody wants them. Nobody even wants a porta potty on spot. There's been some suggestions that maybe a porta potty could go in each of the DEC fishing access areas, but any sort of a bathroom facility would visually and potentially odor-wise encroach on this residential areas, and those properties butt up right to, no pun intended, butt up right against the really any place where that might be installed. And then lastly, while we heard from Joe that having a more sculpted and formal path down to the creek would potentially decrease the liability, one of the people at the meeting was Scott Purcell, who I think used to be the fire chief, but is still runs with the fire department. And he indicated something that we hadn't understood, was that if there is an accident at the base of the falls or across the way, if that wild area on the north side of the creek were to be developed as a recreation area, there is no equipment in Lansing that can do a rescue. And so if that area were promoted and opened up to even more people, that would require a rescue team to come all the way from Ithaca to pull somebody out, and that time could really spell a difference of life and death. And he and several people were quite concerned about that. So that's kind of the short version of it. The the residents, and again, it was 35 or 40 people. There were some couples, some people single. I think there's only 45 houses in Ludlowville, so more than half of the households were represented there. People understand that it is a public park, but because of the size of it, there's a very, very strong feeling that it should remain a local asset and really redirect the aside from just like come in, walk to the fence, look at our beautiful waterfall, maybe have a picnic and leave, but as like a swimming and recreation area, hangout place, there's no interest in encouraging that. And we've got great assets down at the lake and at the town lands, and the people attending the meeting really wanted to keep it that way and enhance those assets, not the local park.
The trail down to the falls, people do not want to see that improved.
No. No, they do not.
It's funny because that seems so slippery and muddy and prone to accidents. I mean, that's interesting.
Well, I think if you are able-bodied enough to get down there, you can get down there. And if you want to swim elsewhere, there's other places to swim. But, a number of people said, I've been living in the hamlet for, 30 years, 40 years, more than 40 years. And last summer was the first year that I never went to the park. I never went down to the falls to swim because it was so overrun by people from outside who were loud, who were messy, who were parking all over the place. And it just changed the experience completely for people who, are very fond of that spot as a place that defines their community. And I didn't go down there either last year for that very same reason, but that was interesting to hear that it was such a common theme.
And this is attributable to the fact that the bridge is out still.
Well, yeah, but when the bridge goes back in, the cat's out of the bag, kind of, once people started, it's been a lot of it's been all over social media and, these waterfall sites. And so, it'll probably maybe calm down in a few years, but to just assume that because it's been wrecked, it has to continue to be that way. I think that, just as trends come and go, there was like drag racing up and down Salmon Creek Road for a few years, and then people grew out of it, and it doesn't really happen anymore. So yeah, people understand the ADA access, absolutely. But to turn it into a major recreation center, it's just not, nobody feels that it's appropriate for the scale of the park.
So I have a question for Pat. What's the story with liability for people swimming there?
I'll speak to a few of those points. There is no thought process in the Parks and Recreation Department to make that a major recreation area whatsoever. Also, the access to the falls, I do not want to create a path for people to go down and swim. We would actually probably just create a deck at the bottom so people can look back at the falls, but no way is there going to be access for people to swim.
Well, there's access now. People swim there.
So I mean, obviously we don't condone that, and we've tried to police it, but you can never police it enough.
Yeah.
And I think the liability issues would be lessened if we actually had some sort of ADA access down there. And then it came to, like I said, a deck and our overlook or whatever you want to call it, with a railing and no way to get off of it per se to get in the water.
Pat, ADA access doesn't require people getting all the way down to the bottom.
True. But I think over my 22 years now, that's been something that's been asked for a lot. Actually, we had a couple different groups that were gonna try and create that path down, not to swim, just to create a safe path. But by the time they looked at the cost, that group or organization couldn't afford to do it. That was the main issue.
And was that group from Ludlowville?
There was some Ludlowville residents in that group, yes. But again, we don't want to create, and there was talk of creating a recreation site on the other side of the falls, but we took that out of the plan because we certainly thought that would be a liability, and there's a lot of issues there as well. So yeah, I don't want to create a swimming hole per se.
So I have a question about process, Pat. We have a few more people to report in about their comments on the master plan. Is the process that we would submit those individually to you, or do you need something from the CAC that would be a little bit more unified? How have you been getting input at this point?
At this point, it's been mainly email correspondence. That's about all I've really got. And then some of the correspondence has been through the website, the Parks and Trails Plan website.
Okay.
But at this point, the plan is going to the town board for adoption this month. So we have modified some language in it so people understand that was just a concept plan. That's not necessarily going to happen.
Okay.
I guess it's the not necessarily part of it that I think a lot of people felt like is kind of slippery language, because not necessarily doesn't mean not.
Yes, certainly. It's only a concept plan or drawing at this time. It's not likely. We have no funding. We have no plan to start construction. So we're a long ways away from this.
Yeah, and that's, I think something that everybody understands and supports, that isn't that this plan does need to be passed in order to make access to funding available to do improvements on the parks that do get a lot of visitation, and people are very, very supportive of that, but they also feel like it's a real stab in the back to develop, certainly the bathrooms, but the trail also. People really value the little bit of wildness there, and coming in and cutting through the woods and taking down trees and cutting through the rock to try to make those, the drop-offs in the chunks of the limestone more, easy to navigate. There's not a lot of support for that.
I would say you're probably 20 steps ahead of us by far with those comments.
Yeah, well, I think that those of us who've been around for a long time do have to think ahead like that, because things come in fits and starts, and so I think it's important to put concerns out on the table so that we know what we want as much as what we don't want.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I thought we did an excellent job of public engagement. Like I told Joe, I was very sorry that those people felt excluded, because that certainly wasn't the case.
I don't know if it was so much that they felt excluded as that they just didn't group the little tiny pocket park in the same category as the the bigger tracts of land. And so, there's some really good lessons that came out of it. People who in Ludlowville, when they see these announcements, are definitely going to try to make an effort to come to things. But I think also the announcements probably could be quite a bit more specific. When one says parks, it might be obvious to people who are working for those parks, but I think that in people's minds, they're, the big parks and the little Ludlowville Park are not the same.
Right. I totally agree with the communication issues. That's obviously one of the things I'm working to address. That's why we've created a new website, and hopefully that'll be in place very soon.
Great.
Karen, did people talk about swimming down there?
I think it's always been understood that it's at your own risk, and of course you don't want to make it, the falls look like Times Square with signs every 3 feet, but for liability, especially if you're going to be, I wouldn't say encouraging, but publicizing that there's a way to get from the top to the bottom, because not everybody who comes there even finds that trail.
Right.
That potentially some signage might have to go up, and it's gonna be controversial. It feels like a really, I don't know, for lack of better words, sacred spot for a lot of people to go down there, and no parking signs at the at the fishing hole might be kind of weird, but that may be what's required for liability regardless. And I think that's up to really up to the attorneys.
Well, I grew up in New York State, and many of the great places to go swimming, it was illegal, but they were the best places, so people went. And Ludlowville Falls is a perfect example of that. It's a great place. But
So I think, Robin, did you have your hand up for sharing comments or a comment?
Yeah, I wrote up just a few comments, and I can send them to Pat as well. But do you want me to just read them really quickly?
That'd be great.
sure.
Okay. Hi, Pat. I don't know if you know me. I'm Paul Paradine's wife, and I do the nest box.
Hi, Rob.
Hi. So as you know, I go around and monitor all these nest boxes at Salt Point and Lansing Trail and other places. So I might venture to guess.
You do a great job, by the way.
Thank you. I might venture to guess that I'm probably in your parks more, 3 specifically, more than any other person besides yourself.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So I'm going to limit my comments to just the 3 that I use regularly, and that's Myers Park, Lansing Center Trail, and Salt Point. And I focused on just skimming the report in those areas. I don't use the other areas as much, so I won't comment on them. But I did just want to, I'll start with Myers Park, just as a reminder that it's an important migratory bird stopover area, especially this time of year as birds are migrating. And it's often attractive to uncommon and interesting species that don't stay here year round. And it's kind of the spring and fall are these, refueling areas where the birds stop over and do their migration, particularly in the spring right now, and in the fall again in, August, September. So, my comments are mostly just a reminder of that. I think there is a sign there to that effect that, this is a bird area. And I just thought it would be nice because many people do come from, around Tompkins County to birdwatch here, that it might be nice to have some kind of hide or blind for photography or birding. And it might also be my thinking about access to the lake shore and, people on the beach. would just be a request that maybe there could be some kind of quiet areas or quiet hours to allow the birds to use the beach. I'm just thinking of a few times where I've been birding there and there's kids running up and down the beach and it's causing the birds to all fly up, which is extremely energetically costly for them when they're trying to get enough food to continue on their migration. I know people want to use the beach and they want to do that. And I just hope that there would be like maybe a specific time or a specific area where it could be off. And it's not uncommon for parks and other places that have beach nesting birds to like rope off a nesting area. Now they're not going to be really nesting there, so we don't necessarily need to go that far, but just considering having some kind of respite for the migratory birds, and maybe something like a hide for the photographers. Salt Point, because it's nearby, it's also an extremely important migratory bird stopover area. You probably don't hear about these things, but on the bird list, we see all the time. It's a very popular birding spot. People are always posting about it. Maybe you don't hear about it if you're not like on the birding Facebook groups, but my department was planning a departmental bird walk there this week, but we got rained out, so we're moving it to next week. But it's just an extremely popular migration stopover area. So that's just, again, a reminder that it does serve this function, whether that's under the microscope of the town or not, I don't know. Again, I do walk this trail every week, just like Lansing Trail, from April to August. And I have to say, I've seen people using the Porta-John. Salt Point is probably the most crowded of the three parks that my comments are limited to. And I do see people using the Porta-Johns, although I've not used them myself based on just my use of walking around and checking the nests. But I do see people use it. It is by far the most crowded of the three, between Myers, Salt Point, and Lansing, in terms of the parking area looking congested. What else is I going to say about that? The fishing area, like parking spot that's just north of it, I rarely, if ever, see anyone park there. I think that little spot is underutilized, and people seem to want to jam into the other parking area that's right by the lake and use that for parking. And I rarely see anybody park in that other area, which I don't know. I'm not sure why, but it does seem like one of the recommendations was to reconfigure the parking. And it just seems to me like everybody wants to park right down by the lake, but very few people will use that other parking spot. And I am not sure why. And I did notice that there was a recommendation to put an information kiosk in there. I mean, as you know, there's already an information kiosk there, so I'm not sure why that recommendation was highlighted, unless the recommendation was to do something more interesting with the kiosk, but there's certainly already a kiosk there.
Robin, just to clarify, that's more for the sign that's out front by the railroad tracks, which I think the Salt Point crew is actually going to make that happen sooner than later. So just to formalize that and make it look like the kiosk in Salt Point, so it'll have the same feel. Not necessarily informative about birds or anything like that, just the random rules that are there.
Okay, like that. You're talking about like the entrance sign that you see when you drive in.
Yes.
Something.
Yep.
Formal. Okay.
Yep.
It's like, yeah. Okay. Yeah. That wouldn't offend me. There certainly need to be some rules there, because one thing I have noticed is an increase in trash since COVID, and more people using that park since COVID than the previous years when I was also doing research there, and it wasn't COVID. There were not as many people. Lansing Center Trail, again, that's a trail I walk once a week from April to August, which is the peak season for being out on that trail. And I have never once encountered an overflow parking situation. That is one of the recommendations I saw to expand the parking area. It's just never come up for me. And I'm there I usually go on Saturdays, which you would think would be the peak day, and then never had an issue with parking. I do think that the driveway, as you go into it, could use some repairs and maybe some fresh stone, but expanding the parking area doesn't seem necessary to me when I'm out there for 2 hours every Saturday, and I never see more than one or two other families walking along. So I think that is because the trail is extremely muddy in the early spring, which seems to keep people away. Doesn't stop me, I still go, but I see other people come in and turn around and leave. So I don't know how you could make this trail ADA accessible with all the mud and the standing water. I don't know what kind of expense that would create for the town, but it is certainly muddy, as you probably well know. And again, I've never had to use the restroom when I was there, and I'm usually there. I walk the entirety of the trail, and usually I make it through without needing a restroom stop. But that being said, I suppose a portage on there could be helpful. And just I agreed with the comment about mile markers. I don't see anything offensive about adding mile markers because it is quite a long trail, and I have been stopped by other people who ask me for directions and navigational tips while they're out there, and I'm like, I don't really know. I just kind of point them how to get back to the parking lot, but some kind of navigational sign probably would be helpful. And as for the parking, again, I'm just kind of circling back to the parking area. Expanding that seems like it would require the removal of trees and the Girl Scout gardens and the kiosk, all of which was put in by volunteers. And it just seems like removing all of that volunteer effort for the sake of a few more parking spaces would send a message to the volunteers that what they did wasn't very valued. And I have a little bit of bias there because my husband works in those gardens and plants those trees and sunflowers, and he's okay with things have to get moved. They have to get moved, but it just, to me, feels completely unnecessary given that the parking lot is A, never full, and B, you can also park over by the chicken barbecue area and walk across the crosswalk and get over there as an overflow parking situation. So those were my comments. Nothing terribly critical, but if you want additional perspective, you're welcome to reach out to me, just because I am there so frequently. If you had questions about things that I notice, I'm happy to give you any insight. I do notice the Lansing Trail has a lot of dog poo bags along the trail. It seems that people are not finding the doggy station at the entrance, or just are not willing to carry their dog poo. But that's an issue for Lansing Trail in a way that I haven't seen in the other parks. But that's it for me. Feel free to reach out if you have questions about the bird boxes or any of the other stuff that I'm doing.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, that dog poo bags is an issue everywhere, unfortunately. And to speak to a couple of those things, the parking lot, I don't have any plan of expanding it. We may blacktop it, just because the fact is, when you pull in, all that gravel or whatever we put in there always comes out, and we're constantly fixing that and addressing that issue. So maybe just some blacktop in there, but no expansion, certainly, because at this time I don't see the need for it either.
Yeah, a different surface would probably be all right. And
Yeah.
I think you do need some repairs there at the entrance, but
Yep.
That's probably what you mentioned, the constant erosion of the gravel. But if I ever do encounter a situation where I can't park there and I have to go across the street, I'll let you know, but it hasn't happened yet. Not since 2014 when I started.
Yeah, I haven't, only on work days when we're all there parked there, we might have to park in different spots. But yeah, I totally agree with you.
Thanks, Robin. I had sent around to the CAC some of my comments, so I will be really brief. I haven't sent them to Pat yet, but I felt like if we're rethinking as part of this master plan and refocusing, then we need to take that really seriously. And for me, rethinking means thinking about climate change and how a master plan can reflect thoughtfulness around climate change. So I had three main topics within that. I thought it was fabulous that they suggested that there be some fees for recreation associated with land acquisition and development. And then I just made some suggestions, given that we're a CAC, that I thought that we should enact a park land set aside for the parklands that would be associated with every development that's greater than a certain number of units. And so that there would be both land and fees, because in other places, when maybe this already exists and I don't realize it, but it seems like people need greenery right around where they live also. And then if we're thinking big, and if people are healthier when there's green space near their homes, then we should begin putting that into place with development. And the town would not necessarily be responsible for these areas, but they could have the vision for them. And then I think kind of along the lines of some of the expansions of the parking areas that were mentioned, particularly in regard to, I think, Myers Park, this came up. I really think the master plan should put even more emphasis on low carbon transportation. I realize we have a huge town and we are very car dependent, but that doesn't necessarily have to be our future. And if we don't put a vision out there, then we won't be able to meet it. So I think we should, with this master plan, instead of just wholesale approving more parking spaces, maybe build out the concepts that are mentioned in the plan, which are good concepts, like this bicycle pedestrian connection map that's on page 71. I think if they had gotten a little more serious about actually showing the potential routes between these nodes, that would have been really useful to think that through and think about those roads and how safe they are, and how safer bike lanes might be established on existing roads throughout the town to encourage pedestrian and bike traffic. And I was surprised that there was no mention, at least that I saw, and I realize it's a big plan, so I might have missed it, but there was no suggestion about someday converting the railway along Cayuga Lake to a rail trail and providing connectivity between the schools and Myers Park and maybe even Bell Station someday. It'd just be such a boon to tourism and recreation and transportation in the town. And then finally, I think, if we're going to really rethink things, then we should rethink restrooms. They use water, they're going to require a sewer connection, and they're pretty expensive for the town. So even instead of porta potties, and this may sound like nuts, but there are composting toilets and they're being used in other places for Parks and Rec. And I put a website in there that is sponsored by Clivus Multrum, which has been making composting toilets for decades. And it's a little bit of a far out idea, but it just thought in reading about these restrooms, maybe we just need to think out of the box a little bit. So I can send my comments if we're going to be sending them individually to you, Pat. And if there is any need, to combine comments, maybe one of our CAC members would do that, but if there's no need, then we'll just do it individually.
No, there's no need. And you're not nuts. That's actually a great idea. So no, that's something we have talked about also, because it does use a lot of water to have a restroom. So you're not nuts.
Regarding your green space idea for developments, there is actually a law on the books in Lansing that subdivisions can be requested to provide 5% of their area for recreational and green space, if the planning board goes along with that. So I don't think a lot of people, I was unaware of that, but Ruth Hopkins told me about it, and I believe that's the case. So there is a precedent for doing that, for providing local green space.
Yep, and this plan is actually the first step. We need to pass that in order to get this rolling.
Pat, you received comments from the planning board, is that right?
Yes, yep, that's correct.
Okay.
I'd like to circle back to Carrie's comment about the, from Salt Point north along the railroad tracks. Actually, myself and many of my neighbors, I live about 3 to 4 miles north of there going towards Bell Station. And we often walk those tracks. It's very popular. We have neighbors from Ithaca who come up and walk those tracks, and it's, spectacular. And I wondered, we when we take these walks, I mean, sometimes we do, cars parked at each end, so we don't have to walk back and all of that stuff. But anyway, we often wonder, is there some reason why, how far off is it to think about that really becoming something that's more really made public, becomes a public access sort of thing, and not just for us locals knowing about that? This is the question to you, Patrick, I guess.
It's certainly been discussed. Actually, that was brought up several times in this whole planning process, was creating that trail, because the tracks are no longer utilized from basically Salt Point all the way to Milliken Station. So yeah, that was brought up numerous times, and by myself and other individuals. So maybe someday we can make that happen.
Well, I'll definitely get that, at least for what it's worth. I'll get it formally into a message to you, I guess. And
Okay.
that actually goes back to Robin's thing about that. We do park in that north end, that north parking lot. We do that, Robin. So we do. There's a few of us there who park there once in a while when we go on those walks. I was kind of, the thing about Ludlowville is complicated. It's so I guess it's so representative of what can happen in a community trying to think about public access, but also protecting the local community who's used to it. So I think for that, I agree. It's not really, it should be somehow maybe with signage or something. Now that it's becoming a little more well-known, somehow clarify that it's more of a scenic outlook sort of place in terms of for the public. Yeah, there's a little bit of a basketball half court and a playground for little kids, but that leads me to think, I always like going down to also taking a look at the falls from the bottom. And so I understand the problem with developing that, and maybe feeling that would be too destructive or whatever, but I feel a little selfish in thinking that only those of us, only those who live around there do that or something. Certainly the swimming, can be, I guess that should be restricted because of so much liability issues. But yeah, it is in people's backyard, but it's, of course, it's not their backyard. It's a public space. So we have to think a little bit about the access, but I think constraining it to not taking it off the books is sort of being really a recreational park, having that kind of tone to how it's advertised, maybe with some signage or something, pointing people to enjoy the overlook, and making it clear it's not, that's kind of what it's mostly there for, not trying to expand it. And I'm kind of just tapping into what other people brought up. So one other thing about Lansing Trail, so I use that 2 or 3 times a week with my dog, with my poop bags, and I always take them out, by the way. But I do get really discouraged when I see poop bags that are left by other people. Sometimes I drag them out myself, disgusting as it is, but I do it. But it's a fantastic place for people who have dogs and like to let their dogs, the dogs, dogs just love that place. I take her on a retractable leash. She can run around and get some exercise, and really nice. And it's, really nice place. And I have my mud boots dedicated just to the Lansing trails. So big hide mud boots. But I don't think it needs more parking. I mean, I agree. I've been there since I've lived here in 2016, and I've never seen that lot full. I often go on weekends, summer, winter, spring, all times of the year. So, but the driveway is a mess, and also sometimes almost dangerous to get in and out of because it's so potholed and stuff. So I do think permanently fixing that entranceway would be good. So I'll get these in a message to you, Patrick. Just make sure I get my notes off.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think there might be a little bit of misinformation with the parking lots on a lot of these things. We don't really plan on expanding. We just it's more formalizing and making sense of it, I guess I would say, than expanding. And I do agree with you. The one parking lot on the south end is used, the fishermen use that parking lot a lot. And then I don't like the way the parking is at the end of Salt Point is just kind of dysfunctional, really. You can't park many cars there. Not that we need to, but when it gets busy on the weekends, we do need some more formalized parking. And that's what I think the plan is trying to do, is just trying to formalize and make sense of all of it. Cause it's not, a lot of it doesn't make sense.
I would think if the railroad track trail actually became a reality, a little parking up there would make more sense. I mean, now we certainly wouldn't mind. I personally don't mind walking a little further. In fact, often we do park. We don't park up there. We walk further. So it's neither here nor there to me right now. But I would think if the tracks became opened up and became more of a well-known option for people, yeah, you might need a little space parking up there.
Yep. I agree. Yep.
Hey,
So,
Pat,
Pat-
I've got a quick question about the railroad, since you mentioned it, about the tracks not being used north of Salt Point.
Okay.
They're very much used during the winter time when Cargill is jockeying their trains back and forth there. I mean, there was dozens and dozens and dozens of cars up there last year. Is that something that's just a sort of a informal situation that is likely to end, or until they tear the tracks up, do you think that they'll continue to do that? Because certainly from just north of Salt Point all the way past the new nature preserve, the Sims Preserve, whatever, Cayuga Cliffs, there, I mean, really, I walked for probably a half a mile past trains last winter.
Yeah.
Is that going to continue?
As far as I don't know for sure. As far as I know, and what I've been told is that was just a staging area for salt cars.
Right.
And that may depend on what the winter brings and how many cars they need. And so that, I don't know how much longer that's going to continue, to be honest with you. They may not need to bring cars down that far. It just probably depends on how much salt is needed per the winter.
There's been times in the past, I walk there fairly often up and down that way. And, in the past couple of years, there's big chunks of that, well, not big chunks, but sections where it really has gotten totally washed out by heavy rainfall events. And there would take some serious maintenance to keep those tracks open. I'm not sure the Salt Point facility is really going to, invest in really keeping the tracks open for that purpose. But I don't know, maybe it's worth it to them. They would actually have crews out there keeping those tracks open for that. I don't know.
I was actually thinking of building a like recumbent trail like railroad bicycle to go up and down. I think it could be incredibly fun to have something that you could just pedal up the tracks.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
So Pat, we'll send comments to you individually, and then what will be your process from there?
I will certainly take them in and read all of them. All of you have made great comments tonight. So I will process them and see if there's any language we need to tweak. But like I said, at this point, we did tweak some of the language for the Ludlowville plan after the meeting they had last weekend. And it is going to go to the board for adoption. So, but I do like your comments, and I do appreciate you taking the time to discuss it.
I have a question about the railroad tracks. I'm sure there's a ton of people that think that's a great idea to make it a rails to trails thing, but what about the people that are opposed to having people walk on their property, people that live along the lake? I mean, how feasible is it to convert that to a rails to trails thing without a lot of litigation, whatever?
Yeah,
Isn't it owned by the railroad company still?
But
I
I've
think it
heard
is.
people express that to me that I can't walk along there because it's their property. So, I avoid walking along the railroad track for that reason.
I think the
People who live there
railroad,
will tell you that you can't.
I think that the tracks are owned by I live right on the tracks, and they are owned by the railroad company. But I think some people have some kind of unusual lease, some do and some don't have some kind of lease agreement as kind of a right of way, being able to cross the tracks or to go down to the lake, et cetera. But I don't think anybody owns something like 30 feet on both sides of the tracks is owned by the railroad company right now, technically. And I'm also kind of, well, it's just, people who say that, yeah, we have some neighbors that say that too. And my feeling is, it's always like not in my backyard. Yeah, I want people to have access to the lake, but not where I live, So I don't know. I think you've got to deal with it. We have people walking up and down that we don't know. And I'm glad to see them enjoying it. I don't know.
I'm sure there would have to be some extensive feasibility done on that one.
Yeah, if you get the community input, you'd have a few complainers, but I don't know how but I don't think they own it.
So should we go back now to the consultant topic, Tom?
Sure.
Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I just want to say thank you to everyone. I really appreciate it. I do value your comments.
Okay, so we are back to 4A, consultant for OSI and conservation plan. Recap the decision in preparation for our work. So, Carrie, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I just want to let people know the process that we followed in case there are any questions about that. So everyone got the matrix, and we received a matrix from David, myself, Ed, Karen, John Fleming, and Tom. And by using all those matrices and putting them together and collating everybody's comments, we were able to eliminate 2 of the 6 consultants that had responded to our request. And so that got us down to 4 consultants. And we refined our questions. We had 15 questions that we wanted to ask the people that we interviewed, and some follow-up questions were generated after that. And so we conducted the interviews at the last CAC meeting. It was a marathon. I think everybody knows we started early, we ended late. And it was also really fun because people were open and prepared, and we were pretty prepared. And through that process, we were able to eliminate 2 more. And then we got down to Bergman, whom we ultimately selected, and one other firm. And that was a more difficult decision. We needed to kind of sleep on it. I contacted references and spoke to at least 2 references per firm. Frankly, got very good feedback from everybody. And CJ had said to us, you guys have fabulous consultants to choose from, so you probably can't go wrong. I think ultimately some of us leaned in the direction of Bergman because of their pretty extensive experience in this area, both geographically, but also open space indices and conservation plans. And they seem to be able to connect well with farmers. John Fleming had a slight leaning toward Bergman, but it was a difficult decision at the very end. And I think we each did a little bit of soul searching about what the right decision for Lansing was, despite whatever thoughts and feelings we had about the candidates. So I don't know if people have questions about that, but I was going to just proceed on to some specifics now with Bergman. Okay. So John Steinmetz, who's the person with whom we spoke during the interview, along with other members of his staff, spoke with me this afternoon just to say he's, he's back from a national planning conference and really eager to begin once the contract can be finalized. The town board needs to go ahead and approve the scope of work. And he is also eager to begin assigning dates to the different tasks. And CJ was reminding me that will probably be in the form of a Gantt chart where we have the tasks and we have the different dates that span certain weeks or months on a calendar. And he also is looking for a little posse of people who would be the point people. He said everyone is always welcome to communicate with him directly, but it's probably most streamlined if he has a couple people he can work with very closely. He's hoping that that would be CJ. It's probably not a surprise to you, CJ. And he was suggesting at least one of the co-chairs, but in talking with Tom, we thought it was really fair to put it out to the CAC and see if someone is interested in, being kind of like a first responder for John Steinmetz. I don't think we actually have to decide tonight, but it would be useful if people already knew they were jumping up and down and very eager to do this. Pick me. It would be great to hear.
Can you describe like what sorts of, I mean, I may be interested. Can you describe what sorts of things? That would
Yeah,
include?
my sense is instead of him having to wait on the go ahead about relatively small things in between CAC meetings and like polling the whole group about, should we meet on such and such a day or such and such a day, or should we have this as our agenda item or that? That he would just bounce some things off of CJ and then to CAC members. And so it would be a question of maybe talking with him on the phone in between meetings and giving him a sense from the CAC meeting about something that might not be clear from the notes. Because our notes are now pretty pared down, our meeting, official meeting notes. So he could probably elaborate a little bit more as to exactly what he had in mind, but this is actually something that Tom and I had talked about. Should we approach the CAC to see if there want to be some lead, if people are interested in being a lead for connecting with Bergman. I don't know, Tom, do you envision anything else for this role?
Well, I mean, it's basically a point of contact or a
Yeah.
couple of points of contact. And I mean, hopefully the information will go to the whole CAC most of the time, but yeah, small stuff. I mean, it certainly makes sense to have a small number of people, dealing with the, as you say, a first responder type deal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd be interested in doing it, some of it.
Great. And I'm also willing. I will say I'm not always the fastest in seeing emails. I'm pretty good with texts. So if I were to do it, I might just warn John that, in fact, if he needs a speedy reply, he might want to text. I do email, but it can be a little sporadic. But having made that disclaimer, I'm willing and interested, and feel like I could kind of keep things moving along, especially if another person's doing it with me. And that way we'd kind of have the CAC side of things covered. And looks like we got a thumbs up from CJ as being willing to do this.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind, helping, but at this stage of the game, I don't think I'm deep enough in the whole process of the town of Lansing to be of much help in this concept. So things I can help with, fine, but enough to be someone making decisions for the rest of the CAC.
Yeah, and I think any big decisions are going to come to the CAC, but little stuff, probably a little more administrative side of things, could be these people. Well, I would be fine with that. Tom, I know you said you're willing if no one else came forward.
Well, Karen sounds like she's interested.
So great. So should we just plan on that? Good. Do we need to do a motion or anything?
No, there's no action you need to take.
Okay.
So Karen, are you okay with that?
With being one of the select, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm off work starting in a week for 4 weeks, and so I will be around. And it might be a good time to plug in then because I'll have a little more flexibility.
Great. Just so you know, one of the things we talked about today, and it was, it's very brief. He's not really technically on board yet, but I told him we were meeting. And so if there's anything we should be doing before he gets on board, that we'd like to do that. And he said there's the possibility that he might be able to, he's going to check his schedule, but he might be able to get down in person around somewhere around the 13th, 14th, 15th of June, right in the middle of June. And I had said I would like to meet him in person because I think it's nice for that to happen. So we'll just see what happens with that. He also said it would be great if the CAC could begin thinking about how to reach underserved communities, because this is part of the scope of work, and obviously a lot of connecting with the public. So he's hoping that we will be able to brainstorm with him, maybe as soon as the first meeting, how to get good representation. And he's beginning to think about, low income people and those with disabilities, people who are in apartments who may not necessarily feel that much a part of Lansing. Do we want to involve certain landlords? How about key stakeholders like farmers and developers? I think he's going to be looking to us for that information. And I'm not sure we have time at this meeting to actually brainstorm that, but maybe planting the seed now. And as you're walking the dog or walking to work, you can be, or checking a nest box, and you can be thinking about, how could we reach people that are a little bit harder to reach, and Karen, your example of the folks in Ludlowville who felt like the master plan wasn't aimed at the Ludlowville Park. That's just a really good example of how different groups may not realize that this open space index will affect them. And I'm glad now that their ears are going to perk up. So Tom, what's your sense that we just kind of plant the seed now and maybe put that on the agenda for the next meeting?
We can do that.
Okay.
One of the things they talked about is pop-up gatherings or whatever, like at the Lansing Market or something like that.
Yeah.
I think those would be really helpful in terms of reaching all kinds of people.
Back to a question I asked a while ago about the relationship between the town and the village. The village has a lot of apartments of low-income people there behind Lowe's and across the way. Now, is this process supposed to be bringing that group into the fold, or is the village sort of on its own little thing down there, and we don't make a great effort in that respect?
Well, CJ, do you want to take that? I see you.
I suppose that's something of a complicated question. The village has its own land use authority, and so generally speaking, they have their they have their own zoning. Sometimes it does refer to town of Lansing, but generally speaking, town actions would be limited to the town.
Would that preclude us from including something like the very large acreage along Trip Hammer and Burdick in an open space? Because I think we already have a photograph of that in our open.
I think that's in the town. I think the only one that's not in the town is in the Blackgin. That's in the village of Lansing.
Okay.
I think the rest of the sites in the scenic resource inventory were all in the town. I'm almost
Okay.
positive.
All right.
But it doesn't mean that we couldn't reach out. I mean, it doesn't mean we can't.
If at all possible, regardless of where we are with pandemic, if we can get all of these meetings done before September, so that we have the option of meeting outside, and whether that means, getting a pavilion down at Myers, or, even under the pavilion in Ludlowville, it is so much better to have this where people can interact with each other easily, rather than do something on Zoom because it's tidier. So that's one thing that I feel really committed to seeing that part through.
I think
That's good.
I think we will have trouble, I think we've talked about a couple times with this, regarding this, is getting farmers involved between about now and October. And they have, if I recall, Bergman really has a 1-year timeline in mind. So when is the timeline? I didn't see in the scope of work. Are they thinking of starting in May or June, or?
I don't think they're going to be even approved by the town board until the town board meeting in
Middle of May.
2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
The 18th, I think.
I think it could be hard to get farmer input until after the farming season. Although, well, there's ways to do it. I guess we could think very creatively to get some farmer input on that. I also had a question about, I guess the process I thought was great. And I think our committee that interviewed these people, we were total consensus that the top 2 were acceptable to all of us. But I think it was the one outlier that I leaned a little bit towards the other group, and it had to do with Bergman's response to, at the end of the questioning, about integrating climate change into the OSI. And his response was, well, this isn't a climate resilient plan. Which of course it isn't. I mean, that would involve investments in infrastructure to build resilience and plantings. But I can't imagine an OSI today where we would not consider the emerging function, or maybe the heavier weighting of the function of different open spaces, how that is different in the face of climate change. For example, areas near riparian zones, et cetera, with the pretty extraordinary 70% increase in extreme rainfall events we see in the Northeast, pretty extreme, even compared to the rest of the Northern Hemisphere. We have to include that. So, that kind of thing, I think we can work into the, in the end, we'll all be involved, I think, in putting together the details of the criteria we use. But even without coming up with completely new criteria, like I think in the Bethlehem one, they have one about sea level rise and climate change, but we don't need to worry about that. But just the things that we would typically have in an OSI would be things like, migratory corridors, wildlife corridors, and a lot of issues about impacts on waterways, particularly with our Cayuga Lake. And so I'm a little concerned that they're going to be, I didn't see any of that in their scope of work. And I just think we have to, at the early meetings, point out that, at least in my opinion, I feel pretty strongly, we may as well have done this in the 1950s if we're going to pretend there's a static climate of yesteryear. So I think it's going to change how we view things quite a bit. And if they have no plan and they haven't done that before, we need to work with them on thinking about how we can do that.
Mhm. Great.
I thought the scope of work and the PowerPoint together were really helpful for clarifying the process and kind of what to expect. And I did see that their timeline, at least the one that was proposed, was supposed to start in May and would go for 10 to 12 months. And they were committing to 6 to 8 meetings with us. I saw 6 in one document and 8 in the other. So I guess one of my clarifying questions is, are the next 6 to 8 meetings of this committee going to be with this consultant, or are those going to be separate additional meetings?
My understanding is that they will attend our meetings and they will run portions of our regularly scheduled meetings the first Thursday of every month. That's my read on that. And John seemed to be saying that when we were talking today. CJ and Tom, do you have any other intel on that?
I don't. I saw 8 meetings. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the PowerPoint said 6 meetings and then the scope of work said 8 meetings.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't clear if that was 8 additional ones or if they were going to be sitting in on these meetings, but I think Carrie answered it.
I do not think they're additional. At least I hope not.
I thought they made some interesting points in some of the evaluation of criteria, one of which I hadn't thought about in our criteria list for conservation easements, which was contamination and the presence of contamination in sites. That wasn't one of the criteria that we had on our list, and I just didn't think of it. On the one hand, it's contaminated. On the other hand, that land is probably cheap and maybe it's something that could be acquired. So I thought that was an interesting point that I hadn't previously thought of. And for me, it spoke to the fact that they considered a wide variety of potential issues. And they may not have spoken to climate change directly, but there was mention of floodplains and flood zones in some of the stuff that I saw, which is not all of climate change, but is.
No, that would be in any OSI that we did 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of the floodplains expanding would be the climate change component. So
Yeah. And we're still waiting for those new maps though, right? Yeah, so. Anyway, I thought their document, the scope of work was particularly helpful for seeing how this is going to go and what we're going to be asked to do. So thank you for sharing that. I think it was CJ who shared that along.
Yeah. Great. Good. So I think that's it, Tom, and I think we got some really great feedback. So thanks everybody for this discussion. And we'll put it on the next agenda too.
Okay, shall we move on to Climate Smart Communities, the grant program, and future projects?
Sure.
So there's $14 million available from March 23 to March 28. And it's a 50% match, is my understanding. And I guess the question is, does the CAC want to actively pursue this? It's basically trying to get extra funding for certain climate smart projects.
I looked through and I was very hep on trying to make it work, but I felt like I needed assistance in pinpointing exactly what we would go for, because from reading the description, I was like, oh yeah, this is great. And then trying to actually find the category was more challenging. I don't know if anybody else was able to do that, find one that wouldn't mean that we go off in some other direction, but that we could kind of keep perking along with the OSI and the conservation plan and get some funding for what we want to do. So maybe I missed it. I went to the pages that CJ was recommending.
CJ, do you have any particular projects that would be appropriate?
Yeah, so that's kind of the thinking that I'm hoping to kind of get us into the habit of is, so evaluating the available resources. This is a big annual pot of money. It's called the Consolidated Funding Application. And it's which I affectionately have nicknamed the Hunger Games of New York, which are every May, New York State puts out the first week in May, a list of essentially all the money that's available competitively through the regional economic development councils. And the reason I wanted to bring your attention to this wasn't necessarily to kind of get you thinking, oh my gosh, we got to necessarily do another project, but thinking ahead maybe to your 2023 work plan and beyond, when you're wrapping up or heading towards wrapping up open space inventory, some of the projects you might want to take on after that. The town has established a capital improvement committee to be recommending significant projects and feasibility studies of any magnitude in the future. So we're trying to get it into the habit of planning ahead, thinking ahead for available funding. And it was more like, I know you guys want to make progress on climate smart communities. This is out there, kind of familiarize yourself with this program, because I anticipate that this pot of money is going to, number one, be probably a potentially very, I don't want to say lucrative, because that sounds like we're in the business of chasing after money. But in any event, the DEC, as you know, is supposed to be promulgating rules under CLCPA. And my guess is that the DEC is going to have a pretty significant piggy bank to go along with that. And so in the coming years, we want to thinking about how we can best capitalize on that for the town. So this is just meant to set some very early seeds and thinking about the grant cycle, which again starts the first week in May and closes the last Friday in July is when the applications are due. And so just trying to get into the habit of thinking through projects that we can recommend to the town that you want to see done as you move out of the planning stage into implementation as the years go on. So that was really the intent, to just kind of familiarize you with that kind of big pot of state money and how it runs.
So CJ, that they said the money is available for 5 years. Is there going to be, excuse me, is there going to be more money added to that every year or what?
That's a good question. There are some pretty significant funding sources coming along. My understanding is, for the most part, they're for water and wastewater infrastructure projects through the Restore Mother Nature Bond Act, which is supposed to be on the ballot this coming November. But yeah, the climate, what I'm thinking is, DEC is going to continue pumping money into climate smart communities as the CLCPA regulations turn into actual tangible rules, as they move from this very high level conceptual scoping plan, as you all now are painfully familiar with, that very, very long plan, into actual, how these things affect people's daily lives. So it's more to kind of start to steep you in those processes, be familiar with that schedule. And it's possible that next May or the May after, you may have some project ideas, perhaps from the open space index. Acquisition of lands can be a really, that's certainly a DEC function, and something I anticipate we're going to be seeing more through a program like Climate Smart Communities. So this is meant to just, get you into thinking things like that, and familiarizing yourself with this. I'm not saying, of course, you guys will be completing these mega grant applications. They are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages long by the time you get done with. I think the Myers Park application was close to 1,000 pages with all the appendices. So yeah, you have to put together a lot of supporting documentation to get money from the state, especially that kind of money. But we're doing that now. We are building the foundational building blocks of that type of work. So this is more, kind of reflection, thinking about that and thinking about ways that we can implement things like the open space index and conservation plan. So just kind of an FYI, familiarize yourself with the state's processes, and just feel free to shoot me any questions.
Well, is the town of Lansing involved in any of these certification programs? Because that's half of the money.
Sure. So we let me just bring this up and take a look at those pages. I think it was 21, right? Hold on just a moment.
Got on the computer.
6 to 8, maybe. Hold on just a
Page
moment.
7 was where they started listing.
Yeah.
They started listing
There we
the certification projects
Okay.
available to certification programs.
Yeah. So and I can also bring up and screen share some of the the town joined the Climate Smart Communities program just a couple years ago, and one of the reasons we did that was to take on PE6 action, the natural resources inventory, which you all know that as we used as a building block. But any of these actions, and let me bring this up here. So we've only done really a handful of the actions thus far. So here we go. So here's the, you can see this. Okay. So here is the Climate Smart Communities kind of portal here. These are the different registered communities, and we can go ahead and find ourselves on this list here, and it'll tell us what we've completed thus far. As you see, there's many. Oopsie, that's the village. All right, and we can take a look at our profile and what we've completed thus far. So here's all the certification actions that we can do as part of this. And this is, it's kind of daunting, and we did have some help from Cornell Cooperative Extension to start kind of hacking away at these. And I would anticipate that we will have additional help, especially if we decide to take on any of these actions here. We could certainly get some help with them. So community climate action plan, any of these really, if we're interested in pursuing. I've heard some interest in the complete streets policy. So these are just essentially ideas. We've talked about the community rating system. Whew, that is definitely administrative lift, but we could use some funding to look into that action further. So I don't know if this is helping, but.
Basically what you're saying is it's time to get started, and we better get started now.
Oh yeah, no, I don't. Well, I didn't mean to be alarmist, only just that I guess what I would say is, broadly speaking, you could read the tea leaves, right? Communities that are willing to take action, these quote climate smart actions, are going to be escorted to the front of the line for state funding in the future, probably across all kinds of categories. So I know Robin wants to say something, so I'll cease and desist. But anyway, just foundational kind of planning thinking here.
Mm-hmm.
I just was thinking, this is a half-baked idea, but one of the actions I think I remember from 2 years ago when we pledged to be a climate smart community was had to do with electric vehicles. And I just came up at work today, somebody planning a trip around, coming to the lab and having to send around a bunch of emails. Where can I plug in my car while I'm on this trip, and how can I charge my electric vehicle? And I think one of those actions was installing electric car charging stations in the town. And I don't know if there was any progress on that, or if that's a viable idea for a way to spend some grant money. But as Carrie mentioned earlier, Lansing is a very car needy place to live. It's very, you kind of do need a car to get around in Lansing. And people with electric cars I've not that I've seen. I haven't seen anywhere in the town of Lansing to plug in. Anyway, that's just was just the half-baked idea that.
No, that's
my
exactly
brain.
right. And Tom could probably speak to that a little further too, but of course, we did a ton of legwork. We had a bunch of firms come in. We visited sites all through the town, got the okay from the fire district to install them, found this appropriate site at town center, and then the Charge New York money like ran out the next week, just as we were about to go to the town board to have that contract approved. But that said, I think that we're going to see probably significant money coming out of the transportation bills that are coming out that are going to flood municipalities with funding for EV charging stations. And I do want to mention that we're super aware of that from a planning perspective and have asked this is later in your agenda, but there is a proposed project on the corner of 34B, the former gas station, to become a new gas station. And we have asked them to install both level 2 and a bank of fast charging stations, which they've indicated that they will do as part of that plan. So there's a lot of different entities that have to come together to solve, something of a wicked problem, right? But as soon as that funding is available again, we're ready to roll with EV charging stations. We've got the sites, we've got, we're ready to go. Just it depends on the money that's out there, and maybe it already is in this pot of CFA money, and I just haven't looked closely. So.
DJ, do you know what does it take, like, because there's some charging stations that are free. What does it take to become one of those?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So charging stations are kind of like they're not sure how exactly to describe this, but some municipalities like I used to work in the town of Danby, for instance, right? And they got really cheap solar pricing through, I don't know, whatever deal they had with either a power purchase agreement or something like that. And they decided as part of their town policy to make charging stations, you could charge there at no cost at the charging station at Town Hall, for instance. But some municipalities, and I anticipate that Lansing might do the same, some charge a nominal fee, such as like $1 an hour, to cover the cost of the electricity and the cost of the equipment. It really depends on the town board, what policy they'd like to set. I personally, I feel comfortable with having free charging, but with a kind of caveat that you couldn't park there forever and ever, amen. That if you were hooked up for more than, say a certain number of hours, that you could be essentially charged a parking rate rather than a charging fee per se. Just out of fairness, of course, to others who, may want to use the station, but that's really a policy question to decide whether the town would want to subsidize that.
That'd be fabulous.
So I think maybe the next step is to see if one or two people would like to delve into this further, and maybe between now and the next CAC meeting, just propose one of the categories that we could potentially go for.
I also think the OSI, should give us, as I mentioned, we're not going to do a climate resilience plan right now, but it could lead into, something along those lines that would feed into this. So I think the results of the OSI should be very helpful, helping us decide what to do. Down the road, I'd be very interested in getting involved with this. It's kind of in my bailiwick, of course, but I think it's I've been at the periphery of some discussions of these kinds of things, of this program before, and it always just kind of overwhelms me. So it's a big project. I think we're doing this OSI thing right now. So we can start thinking about it. I agree, but I'd be happy to begin to think a little bit about it, but we've got our hands full with all the meetings and developing evaluation criteria for the OSI. So.
Yeah, I really feel like I'm at capacity.
Something that's totally off the wall, but one of the issues that's been bothering me a little bit is that the town seems to be at odds with itself over land use policy. In one hand, the town board has approved upwards of almost 2,000 acres of land use for solar panels. But on the flip side, the agriculture community is really concerned about the development of farmlands so that they will not have access to those lands for agriculture purposes. So, and that's not an issue that is unique to the town of Lansing. There are other towns in Western New York who are actually coming up now with plans to stop solar panels being put in because it's chewing up too much prime real estate for agriculture. One of the issues that's out there, which is way down the line, but so we start to think about, is something called agrivoltaics, which is a dual use system where you do have solar panels on a piece of property, but you also have the ability to raise certain crops which are amenable to being grown under those circumstances. The French, the Germans, the Japanese are all going down that road. That's very expensive at this point in time, but that's, if we're going to be pushing for all these solar panels all over the place, I think we need to start thinking about whether or not we're going to end up running out of food because we've just taken over so much of our prime farmland. It doesn't do any good to do all these soil analyses and maps out to say this is prime soil if somebody slaps a solar panel on top of it, because you've got a commitment of somewhere between 20 and 40 years worth of use of that property, which is being essentially taken out of the agriculture. So I'm not sure how the town eventually is going to deal with that, but it's a push-pull on that issue of trying to be somewhat climate conscious with regard to solar panels. But on the flip side of it, we still have an agriculture community that needs to survive in the county and the town. Now, whether the state's going to invest in the agrivoltaics is another issue. It's an expensive proposition and it's just out there in the development process, but it would be worth, I'm not sure who even at Cornell might be looking at that kind of a process, but it's certainly been looked at in a number of places, and it's going forward in, like I say, a number of countries. And I think Massachusetts is going to adapt the program with it at some point, because they also see the need for this dual purpose land use, if you will.
There's also, of course, should just be restrictions on it not being prime agricultural land. So, characterizing agricultural land into the, pieces that, land parcels that are really not otherwise very usable. But this, I thought there was going to be, CJ, isn't there going to be a new agriculture committee as part of the town?
Yeah, the town has an agriculture and farmland protection committee. They haven't met in some time, but actually John Fleming has been corresponding with me about that. And I'm hoping to get them reconvened here, hopefully in the next month or so, to start looking at zoning. And the solar question is really, that's a very broad and complex question in this particular energy policy landscape. But my understanding is right now that New York State Ag and Markets and NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, are working together to come up with some agricultural mitigation strategies, which I think do include agrivoltaics. There's been a bunch of research out of Cornell actually on that. I think Max Zhang was working on that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, very cool. And David Kay, of course. But the short of the long with that is that think about utility scale solar projects as more akin to the permitting process for an electric generating facility, such as a power plant. They're essentially going to be independently reviewed by the New York State Office of Renewable Energy. Office of Renewable Energy Permitting. ORES. And they have a new process that was put into law with regulations. I think we talked about quite a bit about a year and a half ago. And so essentially what's happened is that so many solar projects have come up against local opposition that the state has essentially said, too bad, so sad. We're going to be taking over this permitting process from you, especially for utility scale solar. And that's defined as anything over, is it 20 megawatts? Something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Anyway, town of Lansing is slated for 360 megawatts of utility scale solar across the town's, the north part of the town of Lansing and the north part of the town of Groton. That said, neither of those applications have yet to materialize. We, obviously look at the ORES permit application queue fairly frequently. I look at least once a month, and I'll type in the link there so you can follow along too. But the short of the long is, yeah, that's a pretty complex question, and we're going to see where that goes in this area.
Thorny.
Yeah. Yeah, but I definitely hear you, Ed. There's a lot of people thinking about the agrivoltaics question. American Farmland Trust, like I said, is working with NYSERDA and Ag and Markets to really get real about this intersection of agriculture and utility scale renewables. So, stay tuned, I guess, for lack of a better explanation.
Well, part of the attraction, my understanding, is that a farmer can make a lot more money leasing his land for solar than he can for leasing it for crops.
Especially if it's marginal, it's somewhat marginal, yeah.
Yeah, and those are those questions that are trying to be kind of teased apart right now. American Farmland Trust, I think, recognizes the value of having that diversified income for farms, especially, in the face of real challenges with succession planning. I mean, a lot of these farms don't have folks to take over the reins here. And I will say this about solar. Most development, commercial, residential, you name it, is a one-way street. Once it's been cleared and the foundations are in, it is never going back. It will never go back to agriculture. It's just, it's just kind of the painful reality, of development, really, of any kind. But solar, there is, potential to restore the land, with the right mitigation strategies, with the right installations. There is some possibility there in the future. So it's a complex land use, but I'll say this, I think it does make a pretty quiet neighbor as far as I understand. So there's that.
So CJ, do I understand that if we don't go for this funding cycle, we could go for the 2023 funding cycle, or are we kind of out of luck?
No, I didn't mean to, and I also didn't mean to panic anyone like, oh my gosh, we have to do this right this second. It's only just I want to kind of familiarize you with this process, because just the sheer act of deciding to apply means a whole bunch of wheels of planning also and coordination need to be put into effect, from letters of support to different submittals and feasibility studies that might need to be prepared. I think what I'm trying to say is that I hear a desire to implement a lot of planning work that you've done thus far, and what I'm trying to say is that getting kind of familiar with this process now means in a year or two from now, when the CFA is released, you guys are going to be like, oh, right, this program, the money's up again. Let's get our letters of support. We're ready to move on that acquisition, or, whatever the case may be. It's more just like hey, this is happening. This is a big part of the grant world in New York State. And this is a big part of getting money. And I think I would say there's some concern about, town resources going towards acquisition of open space. And I think anything that we can do to both help people understand that there's the balance between development and conservation are really they're symbiotic. They are, mutually beneficial relationships, rather than this kind of, zero-sum game, will help us, the more that we can diversify those different streams of funding. This is Finger Lakes Land Trust is classic, right? They they do this a lot to be able to acquire land. They spend years in the planning stage. So, and then thinking through grant applications and going after the money, there's got to be a lot of things in place. So it's more just like, hey, this money's out there. Think about it. Yeah, that's it.
Just so I'm crystal clear, let's just imagine we were wanting to go for the funding. How much resource is there within your department to guide us? And I'm just thinking about other grant proposals that I've written in the past. They do take an awful lot of time. And just the budgeting and the letters of recommendation and sketching it all out, all the objectives. Would we basically have to do most of that ourselves?
Not necessarily. If we were to, partner with another organization, or we were to hire outside consulting help, I have to say in some instances, it is very beneficial to have outside consulting help prepare grant applications. That the thing about grants more than anything, I've written a bunch, I guess not really an expert per se, but is, the more perfectly tailored they are to what they want to spend money on, the more likely you are to be funded. And I think that's kind of what I want to get us in the habit of, is recognizing these opportunities and thinking about how we can have, strategic partnerships, especially as we go into, it sounds like you guys want to get pretty serious about, open space and conservation planning. So this is it in a nutshell, is eventually getting money for things like purchasing development rights and all that kind of good stuff. So anyway, just saying this is part of the deal and part of what the money available is.
Hopefully we would also get some help from Cornell Cooperative Extension. They were very helpful with the NRI. Okay, shall we move on to CJ? Once again, would you like to say something about the Code Revision Committee and how that's going along?
Yeah, sure. So we met this morning, and the Code Revision Committee is taking a look. We're drilling down into the proposed new agriculture zoning districts, as well as the map amendments as well. They pretty much closely follow, if you want to follow up on this further, the town's ag plan. I think it was 2015. Does that sound right? Something like that. It does have a really great section on recommended zoning updates prepared by consultant George Franz back in the day. And it's, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 pages in that plan. And we're trying to hew to that pretty closely when preparing the text amendments. So yeah, it's coming along pretty well. I'm hoping to have a draft ready for circulation to you guys and Ag Committee and Planning Board and all the departments and such in early June is what we're going for.
Okay.
But making good progress, I think, all in all. I'm
Great.
happy with that. So.
And once again, CJ, do you want to say something about the upcoming type 1 action?
Yes. Okay. So this was at the request of the planning board, was that type 1 actions should be referred to Conservation Advisory Council. So you'll get to dip a toe in the water of state environmental quality review. So just as a quick refresher here, State Environmental Quality Review Act is required for approval of certain government types of actions. And in this case, we're anticipating that it's a type 1 action because of the adjacency to a building that is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So that's Rogues Harbor. So we will be sending on the plan set. So that'll be a site plan set. The full environmental assessment form part 1, and supplementary materials to go along with that. And so essentially, we can help walk you through this. I don't know what the agenda looks like for your June meeting quite yet, but I'm assuming you'd probably want to take some time to review the plans before your June meeting so that you could be ready to discuss them and possibly make a motion or recommending a set of comments that you prepared. However, I just want to be clear that the Town of Lansing Planning Board will be making a declaration of lead agency at their meeting on Monday, May 23rd, which means that that's basically the start of environmental review. So please don't feel like you have to, rush through to have comments ready for your June 2nd meeting. Yeah, that's kind of the initial start of it.
Jay, could you be a little more specific? It's the mystery is, what is this project?
Oh, I'm sorry. I see the materials linked here, but I don't see a project description. So the project description is, let me go to it actually on the planning board agenda. I'll just bring it up for you. It's in short, the project is Dandy Mini Mart. It's on the corner of 34 and 34B. Let me go to that agenda here. I can tell you a little bit more about the development project itself. Okay. Oops, that's not it. Hold on just a moment.
So that thing came back from the dead, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, geez.
Okay.
But with the revised aesthetic appeal, right, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing they came out with, it looked like they never even thought about looking across the street to see what was there. This was like the ugliest thing you could imagine, but they came back a month later and revised it considerably. But this is all pre-formal activity on the planning board's part at this time, but planning board was trying to tell them, we can't have just a standard old Dandy Mart. We have to have something that's going to blend in somewhat with what's across the street.
So you've seen some of these changes that they're
Yes.
using?
Yeah.
And we have access to them too, Karen,
Okay.
through the Laserfish.
Yeah, sorry about the
thank
laserfish. It's well, it has a mind of its own.
It's a corn maze. You just gotta follow.
You're not kidding.
Well, as usual, if I try to get that link, it tells me I'm not enabled to get it. So if somebody can download it and send me the link, it just refuses, no matter what computer I use it.
We call it the fish because it swims of its own thing.
Well, I ran into the Hoover Dam with it. So.
Okay. Oh no. Okay. So hold on a second. Did that link work? Could you go right to the documents from there?
I couldn't go from the one
in the
that
chat. It's
that
got.
Terry
It should
said,
have.
Oh,
you
there.
should
Okay.
see the concept set. You should see February 22nd meeting. These are public submittals, so you should have no problem seeing any of these.
That works for me fine.
Where is it in the February 2022?
Yeah, so they've had a couple iterations here of changes. So the initial concept plan from last December, December before actually, December 2020, and then May 2022 is the most updated materials. So with that, the planning board will be making a declaration of lead agency, meaning they have intent as the primary government agency to approve the project. They are claiming that they will be lead agency, and of course, many, that's just a statement to say of what their intention is. But it also helps us coordinate too. There'll be significant coordination with Tompkins County Department of Health and the DOT, namely, as a big one, State Department of Transportation. Obviously, this is the intersection of two state roads. So yeah, so you can take a look at these drawings, but your big focus, of course, is on the site plan as well as the long EAF. So that is the environmental assessment form, and that is the basis for environmental quality review, which this board, or this council, I should say, can lend its expertise on that. And so I'm happy to help you think through that and review comments and such.
So it looks like what they did was stuck a little landscape berm on the corner. That's it.
They changed the facade of the building quite a bit.
Oh, are there elevations in this? I am not seeing those.
Yeah. Yep. 427 elevation drawing.
Yeah, there's elevation and facade, both facade and elevation drawings there. Yep.
Which page?
It's called, it's 2022-04-27 Lansing Dandy elevation drawings. Let me see if I got it here.
Seems like with
How do I get here?
evaluating things like this,
Oh.
it's always like what worse could show up? If we say no to this, is it going to be a giant truck stop or?
Oh yeah, I see those elevations. It looks like most dandy marks that I've seen.
You should have saw the original. But it's an allowed use.
Yeah, I know. I have no opinion on this.
We can
Okay, so
tell.
in any event,
We can tell you're, we can surmise.
We can tell you're completely impartial, Karen. I don't think you should play poker in the future. So this will definitely be on our agenda for June. And this is kind of a heads up, kind of like a trailer of a good movie. This little session that we're having.
something like that.
Or a horror flick.
Or a bad movie.
A horror flick.
Well, in any events, so planning board, I anticipate will be lead agency, will be referring the project to you as an interested agency, and we'll be going through that project. And just to also follow up on planning board, you're confirmed for the presentation on this coming Monday, May 9th. And Tom had already sent that information to them under separate cover. So hopefully somebody is coming to present on May 9th, this coming Monday.
So
Okay,
the
great.
plan was to have Todd Walters speak. So,
I think he has agreed. Yeah.
yeah, so we need to get in touch with him, I guess, this weekend.
Are
And
you willing to circle around with him, Tom?
yeah, sure. I'll try and touch base with him. I think he has a copy of the PowerPoint. I hope.
Great.
Okay, yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's kind of short notice for Todd, but
But he had agreed a couple, I think it's now a
Yeah.
couple weeks ago. So,
yeah, but we hadn't confirmed it, but now
Yeah.
it's confirmed as of
And
now.
we'd be by Zoom too. So if he's remote, that's no worries. He can join from anywhere. And which kind of brings us to a little bit of a topic that's not on the agenda. And I don't mean to be putting this on you all right now. I know you probably don't want to get going, but you kind of have the choice of whether you want to continue to meet via Zoom or in person. So the ability to meet via Zoom is beginning to expire for some boards without specific authorization for extraordinary circumstances. Now you're an advisory body. You don't, make law or, make binding decisions on anyone. So I believe that you can continue to meet remotely if you so choose. So that's just something to chew on, if you like it.
I actually talked to John Steinmetz about that today, because he's based in Western Rochester, and I told him I thought we had the freedom to continue with Zoom meetings, especially if it was useful. And he seemed to indicate that it was. I know it's useful to me personally, so I'll just kind of put that out there. Other thoughts?
I think Zoom works pretty well. I'd like the idea of, like periodically, meeting in person. So 4 times a year or something like that, would be just something along those lines.
Well,
I
right.
think we're still, we're still at the high end of COVID.
Right.
in
Yeah.
the
But it's a little
county.
premature, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's finally happening where now there are people, much closer to me. It's not, more
Yeah.
than a degree or two separation, and I just I can't afford it right now.
Yeah, I think we'll stick with Zoom for the near future.
And,
Central- Go
as
ahead,
far as
Karen.
getting together in person, I think you folks probably thought that I've been in contact with Finger Lakes Land Trust about a Bell Station field outing, which I think would be really nice for us since it has been so long, to David's point,
Yeah.
especially if we could get together outside.
Yeah.
And so they are hoping for a closing on the land, and they would hope that they could do a mid-June tour of Bell Station for those who are interested, but I'll keep you posted.
I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
Me too.
Okay, any new business that we want to discuss? Okay, I think we could call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a lot of material.
Yeah, everybody have a good evening.
Okay. Good night.
Yeah, and thanks,
Good
thanks CJ for all your work with the consultants. That was
Yeah, of
just
course.
really helpful.
Thank you all. You
Yeah.
guys did all the heavy lifting, so no worries. Happy to help.
Well, you're
See you guys soon.
sealing